Without further ado, we call upon opening government and Prime Minister here.
All right, before I start, I'd like to give a quick thank you remark. Thank you, Ethan Mott, for giving me bubble tea and beating me in round one. Shout out Jared and Terrence, who unfortunately are not in this round because he dropped in semis. Shout out Matthew, who's also not here because he dropped in quarters. And lastly, shout out my partner, Charlie. Okay. The NDPs in the status quo are in a position of submission. They align with a party that is clearly going to lose the upcoming election, and one that claims the NDP's own policy successes as their own. It is time for change we're very proud to propose. I'll talk firstly about what we're going to do alongside voting no in the election in our model, and I'll talk about two arguments. Number one, why a weak minority government under the Conservative Party, the NDP has a chance to seize significant power as a coalition, and secondly, why the current status quo is unacceptable because the Liberals are quite a bad coalition partner with the NDP. In terms of our model, the first thing we're going to do is that we're likely going to launch some sort of attacking the Liberal Party in the upcoming election. Their ineffectiveness in combating inflation, their increasing power of corporations and neoliberalism that puts profits in the hands of companies instead of the people. We've launched things such as massive advertising campaigns to differentiate us from the Liberals. We show the policy that we've been able to pass, like the dental bill, that they themselves have claimed, and we turn to the pro-people, pro-union party that the people are begging for. So in all forms, it looks like turning against the Liberals and making sure that they lose the election. There are two arguments then that we're going to run on open government. The first argument, why a weak minority government under the Conservative Party means that the NDP has a chance to seize significant power as a coalition in the election. The premise of this argument is that the Liberals are likely going to lose this election. This is likely going to be true because there's a long tenure of Liberal partnership that the populace has not been happy with. For example, Justin Trudeau has been in power since 2015. There's a fragmented left. The economy is quite bad right now as inflation is incredibly high, which makes voters very, very mad. This means that the Conservatives are also likely going to win in a weak minority for the following reasons. Number one, because the Conservative regional base is not majority of the provinces. The Conservative Party tends to have very strong support in certain regions, particularly in Western Canada like Alberta, Saskatchewan, but struggles to in urban areas and provinces that are much more left like Ontario. And so that challenges them to gain a very large majority in Parliament in the very first place. It's also that the Conservative Party has historically struggled with gaining significant support in Quebec, which is a very key province with significant amount of seats, and so their policies oftentimes are just non-aligned with the most left province in Canada, which is Quebec, which weakens their ability to form a majority government, suggesting that their minority status is much more likely on our side of the House. That's why the status quo is in a position where Pierre Poilievre is probably going to win the upcoming election, but that's because Trudeau is simply a bad leader, but not to the extent that they're able to form a majority government. So, what happens when the Conservatives are the weak minority, and why is this good for the NDP? The first thing to point out here is that this allows for huge amounts of leverage as the NDP party, because the Conservative Party also needs to appeal to them as a coalition, right? So if the Conservatives are a weak minority, the NDP would be in a very, very powerful position to extract concessions, as the Conservatives might be more willing to make larger compromises in our world. When the Conservatives are in a weak minority, they don't have enough seats to pass their own laws, and therefore they need an NDP support and have to make large amounts of concessions. And so we think the leverage in a Conservative minority government is quite good, because in a scenario where the Conservatives need the NDP to form a government to pass critical legislation on their own political agenda, the NDP can assert their own agenda and have a considerable influence over policies, and they're able to secure things such as concessions on specific issues they prioritize in their voter base, such as healthcare or social programs. That cannot happen on their side, because currently the NDP is partnered with the Liberals, and if they're going to lose the election, it is very hard for them to form a coalition with the Conservative government. So the impact here is that on our side of the House, you're able to co-ally with the winning government, and you're able to push your own values through this minority government. You're able to demand things on their own political agenda, such as increased social spending, more action on climate change, expanded public services, etc., etc. That ruling party suggests that you're able to guarantee some form of NDP control that is increased in the status quo that they want to defend. The second argument, while the NDP in the status quo is getting screwed over with their partnership in the Liberals, I just want to point out that in the status quo, the NDP is seen as a government that does absolutely nothing, which is a reason for why many voters simply don't vote for them, because they understand that their vote is going to get wasted. The reason for this is because, perceptually speaking, the Liberals have historically claimed almost every single one of the policies that NDP has passed. For example, a very recent of this NDP policy that I learned in my history class, shout out Mr. Wood, is that the Liberals claimed the dental care policy that the NDP themselves passed. So the key priority for NDP during negotiations with the Liberal government was this dental thing, but when it actually passed, it was framed as a Liberal initiative, despite being the result of large NDP influence. The NDP also pushed for stronger federal action on affordable housing, especially during budget negotiations. The NDP has championed the idea of a National Pharmacare Program. All of these things are things in which the Liberal government have claimed towards their own. And so the impact towards this and the implication is that it is, no matter, as long as you stay with the Liberals, no matter what you do, no matter what pass, you'll never get the spotlight under a Liberal government because it appears that you are already aligning with them as they're relatively similar voter bases. On our side of the House, this changes because it's very clear under a Conservative government the NDP is being useful. If the NDP were to negotiate with a Conservative minority government, any policy wins they achieve, especially in areas that they themselves prioritize, are very clear because the Conservative government wouldn't pass it on their own. And so under our Conservative minority, the NDP can negotiate for clear policy outcomes that highlight their importance in the world, and that's why we're very happy to stand on opening government. Thank you.
So I wanted to start with some thank yous. I'd like to thank Eric for being a great partner. I'd also like to thank my parents and my coaches, Adam, Benny, Hanny. But also I'd like to shout out Dennis Liu for being my first debate mentor. That was fun. Yeah. Okay. My time will begin in 3, 2, 1. Panel, this debate is a choice for the NDP. One for survival and one for destruction. And we believe that we on opposition are the only ones that provide a chance to survive. First of all, we want to be very clear as to what the burden is on government. We want to say that they have to defend having a snap election right now, because that's what non-confidence is necessarily going to devolve into. You need to have an election in this period of time. So we see what the comparative is going to be very simple. Our counter model is actually going to involve a lot of these same sort of actions which are taking under theirs. But it's going to look like you're going to continue to vote on policies on a case-by-case basis. You're not going to vote non-confidence. But we also want to be very clear as we're not supporting the supply and confidence agreement that we used to have. We are distancing ourselves from the Liberal insofar as we're not going to be voting on them with every sort of policy. We're going to do it as the normal party would, for example, like the Bloc. So uniquely, though, that we can defend this, but opposition has to defend a snap election due to the non-confidence and the nature of it when it comes to parliamentary procedure. So necessarily, we say that what the scope of this debate is whether or not we should vote non-confidence within the next couple months. And we say this is very clear for a couple of reasons. First of all, because the political situation is just ever-changing, insofar as we cannot predict effectively what's going to happen in 4 months from now. So necessarily, when it comes to weighing this debate, we need to think about what can realistically happen in the next 4 months and whether or not this is going to be in the incentive of the NDP, but also more so on what can happen in the election, but not on whether or not we should vote on it. First of all, we want to frame and illustrate what the current climate is going to look like. We say that currently it's likely going to be a Conservative landslide win. Because first of all, because NDP is seen as pawns when it comes to any sort of thing which is Liberal is passing, and it's often seen as more radical. So it's unlikely that they're going to be able to win as many seats in order to get an actual a minority government from the Conservatives. Because uniquely we say there's only two parties that can effectively oppose the Conservatives when it comes to any election. The Bloc only runs seats in Quebec, so it's only the Liberal and NDP. The Liberal is not winning seats due to its political nature, and the NDP simply cannot do so because they're connected so much with the Liberal, they're seen as more radical, especially if we do it now. So we say that necessarily it's a Conservative landslide. What this means also, though, is that the framing of the election is necessarily bad for the NDP, because it looks like the pure poly-average very clever thing, keep the jobs, build the roads, axe the tax. Necessarily, the way that it's framed on the carbon tax election is just not going to be beneficial when it comes to anything which the NDP is doing. But third of all, we say that the Conservatives are necessarily incentivized to make big changes now in the kind of climate, simply because they are likely to receive a majority. They can trade off some seats, but it's still above the majority mark in order to fulfill their longer-term policy goals, and they're willing to do so when it comes to this specific election. I'll take it in a second. So we want to say that necessarily that the environment is going to be very bad, and we're going to explain how this is necessarily political suicide when it comes to the NDP. We're two different sorts of possible mechanisms. First of all, on how it's very difficult to distance yourself from the Liberal Party within the next couple months, and we say that this is very clear because we have to do so before this snap election, which is going to occur. We say that, first of all, the Liberal and NDP have had a considerable connection when it comes to the supply and confidence agreement that has existed. But also because the NDP is just necessarily associated with the Liberals because they're both considered left-wing parties. So we say that this is a distance, and this is something which is necessarily going to be true. We have to create some sort of distance. But also we say that just necessarily doing any sort of non-confidence before December is not allowing you to get time to create the actual platform which is created through stances over a longer period of time. We were taking specific decisions when it comes to, we are not going to support the Liberals on this policy. Necessarily, when you're doing these kinds of voting procedures and you're going through every day in parliamentary business or opposition days which the NDP is going to receive probably within the next couple of months, it's necessarily useful in order to have a public place in order to get your political views across that's uniquely, apart from campaigning directly on the campaign trail, this is uniquely has a broader view and broader scope. So we say that necessarily it's going to be beneficial for us in order to do so, and we can distance ourselves to a considerably better degree if we do it through parliamentary procedures and we do it over a longer time scale. But more so, we want to say that even even if this isn't true, we see that campaigning in December or any period around this time is just necessarily bad because of stuff like Christmas. It's often a really bad place to campaign electorally because people do not want to do or do not want to engage with politics. And especially because the NDP is such a new act and they have to distance themselves considerably, people are unlikely to actually tune into these kinds of things, so they're likely going to vote on their intuition. So we say that's necessarily going to be bad. I'll take it.
If you talk the talk but don't walk the walk, that's exactly what the NDPs are doing. People know that, and the NDP's position is currently
Yeah. We're walking the walk and we're talking the talk. Because necessarily, if you're not voting with the Liberals, you are separating yourself from them. We don't have to take the nuclear option when we have the simpler option of not supporting them on every basic policy which they do. Because and now we're going to prove why this is necessarily supporting the Conservatives in the mechanisms which they claim is necessarily antithetical to the belief that the NDP holds. First of all, because we say that the framing of the election is necessarily bad for the NDP. It's like taxes which are good for them, like the carbon tax and the environmental stuff which has also been happening, is necessarily beneficial and something the NDP has been campaigning for, but also just like immigration and other stuff. So that necessarily the framing of this election is necessarily going to be bad when it comes to the NDP's political platform. But more so, we say that when you're going against the kind of government is buying into narratives of weakness and the fact that you're supporting the Conservatives actively because they are the ones who are in position of power when it comes to these kinds of narratives. But more so, it causes infighting internally when it comes to the party because people are not going to all want to do this, and we say this is necessarily bad because it means that party dynamics are going to be very negative. But more so, it's really bad for the strong base of NDP voters which you're currently holding. So we say that necessarily this debate is going to be really bad when it comes to the NDP. And my partner is going to bring up an argument on political leverage. But we say that keep the libs, build the party, vote for O. We're proud to oppose.
Before I begin, I just want to say a couple of things. Firstly, these views are, for debate and not necessarily my personal views. Secondly, a couple of shout-outs. First one is to Ethan Ma. He was the only team that actually beat us, so that was quite nice. And proceeded to drop him in rounds. And then Nathan, I don't know why I'm thanking him. Low-key, we were sleeping on the same bed, and he didn't make me. I couldn't sleep very well because he was always moving. But where's Ethan Zhang? Oh yeah, he bought me bubble tea. So Ethan Zhang, thank you. And my parents, love them. Okay, the comparative that opening opposition wants to push is to stay in the status quo, where the NDP continues to do and continues to hamstring a government that is currently ineffectual. This is the exact reason why the NDPs are perceived to be ineffectual, unwilling to do any sort of work, and we were very, very happy to propose. I want to first talk about what the current perception of the Liberal Party actually is, what the party or the position of Canada is actually in, and I want to talk about why even if we do not succeed in getting a mass amount of vote, we're going to be winning inside the long term. So, I want to be very clear as to what is happening right now. The cost of living has massively increased. The corporate profits have soared while wages have not kept up. Inflation is making it more difficult for Canadians every single day to live. Does this sound like a conservative place for them to win? Presumably it isn't. Because the reason that the Conservatives are, this sounds bad for Conservatives, is because the Conservatives are a neoliberal party that wants to see deregulate the private industry, for example, where they oftentimes don't want to actually help the poor people, but want to help the rich over there. And the thing is that most people in general probably know that, but the only reason they're voting for the Conservatives is that the economy is doing very bad, and they want to have some change, even the possibility of a better change. What we're doing right now is seizing the moment and seizing opportunity. What we're doing is that literally the stars are aligning for us. All the reasons that the status quo is very, very bad is all the reasons that the NDPs are looking to win. Strengthening unions, having social welfare, and making it so that people can actually afford the current, houses and all that sort of stuff is all the reasons that NDP should be able to win. And if we were able to capitalize with, especially with our model, we're going to be having a massive amount of advertising for showing policy that we're actually able to do. We think that we're likely to be able to do that. Secondly, why is it the case that opening opposition counter model just simply doesn't work? I want to point out, even if we do not succeed, we're going to be winning in the long term. Why is it the case? The first reason is that we do not get hung up in the liberal incompetence, which say that the common perception of the Liberal Party, moreover, when they're doing literally exactly what they're doing, which is to literally have no change, but to hamstring the government, is presumed to make it so that Liberals are perceived to be very, very ineffectual. The issue with this is that as the NDP and as being in a coalition with the Liberal Party, that the ineffectualness applies to us as well. So what that means is that, on compared, what is significantly more likely to happen is that the NDPs are perceived to be unwilling to actually help and is actually supporting the Liberal incompetence and unwilling to actually do anything. This is exactly the reason why Pierre Poet even voted the no confidence in the very first place, to force the NDPs into a position where they have to make a stand. Either it's the case to stand with Liberal incompetence and to do nothing to help the main group of people inside of Canada, which happens to be with the poor, or to actually create change. And we think that we should probably create change over there. But secondly, the position of the NDPs is not static. The position of the NDP is actively getting worse every single day. So yeah, surely opposition said that the anything can happen inside of politics. Well, yeah, sure, Jack Layton can come out of the dead. We don't know that, but that isn't a good reason. We are giving you structural reasons as to why it's likely that NDPs are going to do well with over here. So the issue of the status quo is that NDPs are degenerating and we are weakening by the minute. People will vote for the lesser of the two evils and don't think that NDPs are going to do things. Moreover, when you combine that with the fact that the literal counter model is to not provide policy by hamstring all the things that the Liberals are doing, presumably that makes us look even worse, to make us look even less ineffective. But the issue is that the perception of the NDPs is that they only say things and never actually get things passed. They say that we are seen as the pawns of the Liberals, but if we don't do anything for the status quo, and what limited policy that we can now get never goes to us, this continues to happen. I'll take LUOhio from opening. Sure. But closing? Alright, great. No engagement, I'll see you in rebuttal. So, the issue is that people know that the NDPs don't do much as of right now. If their counterpart is to hamstring, as I want to point out again, hamstring any sort of change that can happen inside of policy, presumably is the case that means that we are perceived to be seen as very, very bad. Well, and unable to actually do any sort of policy, unable to represent the primary group that want to be represented, which is the poor, the people who are inside of unions, as the ones that NDPs have not been able to help right now. So what that means that the policy and the counterpart they want to support, they agree that there's an issue in the status quo, but they seem to be unwilling to actually do anything about it. We need change. We need drastic change, but they seem to be unwilling to actually accept that. Now, I also want to point out, the voters do not want any effectual government and a government that doesn't do anything. They want a government that can actually change people's lives. The Conservatives for a very, very long time have been in a position where they want to support deregulation, things that most people know will probably not actually improve the average quality of life. They only want to stop immigration, but not to a very, very large extent, because they know that Pierre Poilievre knows that that immigration is probably needed to sustain Canada's economy. Well, the NDPs have been in a position where they have continuously supported things like social welfare programs, where they have continuously been on the left and they've been helping people with their social welfare programs and things that help people in general. Now, the counterprop that opening opposition does is to stay the status quo, where our position is decreasing every single minute, where we're weakening every single day, and will probably mean that we'll get less votes in the future, less money, less funding, because nobody will ever perceive that the NDPs can do anything. We're very, very happy to propose. Thank you.
First, I'd like to thank my partner, Keerti Joshi. He's been a very good friend to me throughout most of high school. Second, I would like to thank his parents for driving me and also providing me dinner. That's very good. Thank you. Okay. Speaker, my partner has already characterized to you why the NDP is in a situation of survival, why they have no options out. And here government offers an even worse alternative to what they have currently. We're so proud to oppose. Three things on framing, right? First, their attack on Liberals, right? This is not mutually exclusive in any part. We tell you that we can still critique the Liberals irrespective of what position we take in this vote. That, if we don't vote, it's also, our silence is also not necessarily supporting the Liberals. Second, we want to say that for the majority of the case, that they don't actually characterize to you the proper incentives of the NDP. It's intrinsically assertive on why the NDP matters, it cares only about these certain things such as the economy, right? What we think to do is that we want to characterize that the NDP is just like any other political party and has the same incentives as any other political party. Then on to refutation, right? They tell you that the NDP can seize significant power in the first place. We tell you that, they tell you that Conservative Party is still not in the most strategic governmental position. We tell you this is blatantly false and assertive, right? They talk about how they'll be a super weak minority, which is just blatantly not true, right? We don't think this is true because, first of all, they already characterized you, as Charlie says so many times, that Canada has had high inflation and destabilizing periods of economic gain for so long, right? That people are much more willing to go to extreme lengths to sacrifice whatever other people that they want just to get better rates, just to get slightly better economics. We usually also think that Conservatives are the party that in general are in respect
that like generally does this. But second, we want to tell you that the vast majority of people vote based on economics, not based on their race, not based on what minority they are, but based on how much they can put food on the table. So the vast majority of their things is that the NDP won't get the support that they necessarily need in the next election. Second, we also tell you that the NDP is actually closely associated with the Liberals, and this is why they can't actually get any change on their side. It's because the general consensus is that the NDP is a more like radical version of the Liberals, and generally, when the Liberal policies have failed, they also currently suffer from that. So in that respect, then, we would like to say that the NDP cannot actually gain any political leverage because of the current situation that the Liberals in. But third, here's the analysis on why within the election, it doesn't necessarily matter on how necessarily like Conservatives win. Because even if we assume Conservatives win, we're talking about the long term here, right? So generally, we want to collaborate with the Liberals because they are a party, because they're a party closely, relatively aligned to our goals, we tell you that the Conservatives are a party that's going actively against our goals. Second, on how they can get concessions. We tell you that the Conservatives will pass broad legislative things that maybe gets you some form of concessions that maybe you can force some way into. But we tell you, first of all, that they might likely get a large majority. But second, we also say we can easily flip this, that the Liberals won't actually ever work with the NDP again. We say that's bad because the Conservatives are just not aligned on your goals. First, on rebuilding then, the electoral suicide point, right? It's very hard to distance yourselves from the Liberals, first of all, as my partner points out. But second, it goes actually against the core ideals of the NDP. The response to this, and Ops analysis on this, is that it's not political suicide because you're in a good position. We literally prove to you why this position doesn't necessarily exist. But even assuming that if the NDP is in a good political position, they're just too closely associated with the Liberals. And we would also say that going against the core ideas of yourself as a party, going to collaborate with the enemy is not necessarily the best thing to do. So if I was a person that was going to collaborate with the CCP, for example, just for some more political leverage, we would say that no party actually wants that in the real world. But second, we would tell you that there's much more political leverage on our side when we actually collaborate with the Liberals, right? That they have a unique position of power that they've never had in decades. This is why this is so important, right? We tell you that they have the possession to pass the majority of policies in the first place. That the bloc is so basically, how does this beat out any of government's actual other points? Is that the reason why the NDP hasn't been credited, according to their second point, is because they have never actually seen as an important tipping point, that they have never been actually seen as the one who does all the change as asserted by them in the first place. But second, let's take this assertion at face value, right? We could say that now they are perceived as an important tipping point. This is why we're debating this motion right now. It's because there's controversy surrounding the fact that they are an important tipping point, they are an important party that is able to pass laws and has enough power to pass laws. Third extension on how there's going to be infighting in the party and why the NDP generally doesn't want that in the first place. The reason we're debating this is because of controversy yet again, right? So there's probably many members within the party that disagree with your decision. Why is this specifically bad for the upcoming election? First, it draws your attention and resources away from the majority of the time that you could have spent campaigning. But second of all, we tell you that December is just a strategically bad time to do this, as pointed out by my partner, that the majority of people don't have time to research a lot of this. And third, you could just be passing policies along with the Liberals to strengthen whatever their position is for the next election. So as long as the Conservatives go against the goals of the NDP, we're so proud to oppose this motion.
Before I start, I'd like to make a thank you speech. First of all, I'd like to thank some of my friends who came to support me at this tournament. So just in order, Manish, Andrew, Felix, Angela's somewhere, Yichan as well. Second, I want to thank Hank because his brother didn't thank him for some reason. So thanks for being here, Hank. Sorry, but I'd like to thank my partner Catherine because it sounds really weird with the microphone. Catherine's genuinely one of the best debaters I know. Also really nice person. So thanks, Catherine. Lastly, this is important. For the past 5 months, there's this guy called Lyashko who's really been helping me out, become better at debate and stuff. And I wanted to thank him in a thank you speech for a while, but I keep dropping before I make it to finals. So thank you so much, Will. I wanted to say it for so long. Hopefully you see this in some recording. But genuinely, it means so much to me. Cool. Well, I say that, and now I'm gonna drop a 72. Okay, I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. This is not a debate about where the NDP is able to gain political power and leverage in the short term, for 2 reasons. First of all, the NDP won't have power on either side of the House. Because even in opposition's best case, where there is a coalition government, Liberals still have most of the power. The NDP is dependent on these Liberals who actually gain political leverage in the first place and have a majority in the House. So oftentimes these Liberals are able to dominate the NDP party in the kinds of policies that they actually want passed, because the NDP is dependent on these Liberals to actually have power in the House of Commons. But second of all, the NDP isn't the party that's gaining seats in the short term. First of all, because the Liberal Party is still able to shun the fact that you abandoned them, that you signed this coalition and then you turned on them or whatever, so you're able to shun the Liberal voters away from them. But second of all, Conservatives are still safer and more prominent for the average voter who isn't a hardcore Liberal or a hardcore Conservative or whatever. They're going to still choose to vote for the Conservatives. So it's genuinely unclear to me, after opening government's case, why I'm able to get NDP power in the short term. What we're going to show from closing government is that this hurts the NDP's reputation in the sense that they will be able to gain power in the long term and actually achieve policy success in a more realistic case. Why do we think this doesn't hurt the NDP in the short term? Look, the NDP is a decently strong party. They still have significant political backing to some degree, even if it's not as powerful as the Conservative or the Liberals. Even if they go away from the Liberal Party, there's still going to be some NDP voters who are actually passionate about the NDP party, so they're still going to survive. They won't die. Cool. Why is the NDP able to gain leverage in the future? This is for 2 mechanisms. First, populations currently growing care about politics far more and actually values change. So because we have a younger generation that cares more about what's happening in the future, that has been shown to care more about able to change the status quo, we think it's likely that they're going to be able to vote for a different party in the future when they grow up and not just maintain the status quo of Conservative and Liberals. But second, I think there's a progressive shift towards more leftist policy or progressive ideals throughout people in the younger generations when they see the Conservatives or whatever left them really high cost of living, for example, or the fact that the old generations left them really high tuitions. There's an average progression towards wanting to be more progressive and want to shift away from the kinds of policies and inflicted them into this kind of lifestyle. Why do you think that they then lose power over time and lose their capacity to access this power? We're going to talk about how this hurts reputation. And here I want to point out that there's a tension in the opening government case. Because if Liberals truly take claim for all policy, the backlash will obviously go to them, to the extent that they are the ones who are claiming for the cause of everything. But we're going to explain that's why it actually hurts these people's reputation far stronger than that. First of all, I think voters are going to associate you together regardless of whether there is going to be Liberals taking all the claim, because you campaign for similar things. And also because there is an expectation to support Liberals in elections, which responds to opening opposition's counterfactual. Because first of all, this is what actually gains trust from the Liberal Party to want to continue to be with you. But second of all, this is what actually gives you power in the first instance. If you're just ignoring the Liberal government and not actually helping them campaign or whatever, obviously the Liberal government isn't going to like you enough to want to give you a lot of power in the first instance. But second of all, I think Conservatives attack you both together because you are a government together. So this is Pierre Poilievre attacking the NDP about the coalition in things like social media ads, and also with things like your policies oftentimes being farther left than the actual Liberal Party, so it then becomes easier for the Conservative Party to sometimes find ways to attack you in the first instance. I think on our side of the house, you only have to attack Liberals and hurt reputation for them for these Conservative parties, because they're the only party that's actually a major threat to the Conservatives. Oftentimes, I think that you then on our side are able to avoid people engaging in politics being coerced away from the NDP, and they're less likely to develop biases against them. Oftentimes these biases become incredibly difficult to overcome in the future, due to things like current people right now developing distrust that manifests when they're actually able to vote, or politics being inherent to your identity, so when you right now associate with the idea that you don't like the NDPs or whatever, in the future you don't like the NDPs as well. So on our side of the house, however, when you aren't actively getting attacked by the Conservative Party, you're able to build up a reputation with a younger population that actually likes you, without having to face constant backlash and scrutiny and attacks. But second of all, I want to talk about how this gets more attention for the actual parties. And the problem in status quo is that oftentimes, because of the coalition government and they advocate for similar policies, news and media have an incentive to go to the Liberal Party, like Justin Trudeau, or the more popular Liberal candidates, because those are the ones that get more attention and headlines, and because broadly NDP and Liberals campaign for similar things. On our side of the house, when the NDP is an active party that's actively fighting against the Liberal government, for example, or actively showing that they're a unique party to the Liberal government, what ends up happening is that media is forced to engage with the NDP party to the extent that they have unique policy, because they aren't just another arm of the Liberal government. And you get more things like engagement in the media, for example, for younger generations, engaging with them in the news, where they are able to develop that touch point or actually learn about those policies, as opposed to just seeing them as an arm for the Liberal Party or whatever. I think on our side of the house, then you're able to gain power in the future because you're able to appeal as an alternative to the average Liberal voter in the future. So otherwise, I don't think there's really that much of a preference between Liberal parties or NDPs to the extent that they're associated together. So in the future, these Liberal voters are still going to vote for the Liberal Party. Or oftentimes you're just going to have the average voters
So voting for Conservatives, if you associate Liberals and NDPs to both be bad. On our side of the house, when these NDPs aren't actively getting their reputation destroyed, but are able to actually engage in the media and develop and showcase their own policies to the world, what ends up happening is they're able to get more attention and more buy-in in the first instance, which allows them to develop a stronger reputation over time, which allows them to actually gain power in the future. For all of those reasons, I'm so proud to propose.
Okay, before I start my speech, is it okay if I give a thank you speech? Okay. First of all, thank you to my mom and my dad, because without them, I would not be here. So obviously, thank you so much for them. Second of all, thank you for my partner, because I also wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Abdullah. Third of all, thank you to all of my friends who are here. Shout out to everybody who is over there. Specifically Angela Wu, because she said I love Catherine, and everybody in my school debate club over there. And last but not least, thank you so much to Orcon, because you guys made the tournament so fun. And actually, this sounds like I'm going to be copying Abdullah Khan, but that is actually not the case. Because for the past few months, if it was not for this person who had been coaching me, with no pay, by the way, I would not be able to do anything, basically. So thank you so much to Raymond Cho. Yeah, that is basically it. Okay. But if I do really bad, don't associate this with him at all. This, my bad, all right? Panel, if CG does win on anything, I want it to be because of this one reason that I will say at the beginning of my speech, which is that OG's all impacts are quite uncertain based on their own mechanisms. Now, CG will provide you an alternative, and Abdullah has already told you that. Now, in terms of OO and CO, what they lack is quite literally the same, which is a comparative. They've never told us why, compared to slow political suicide, compared to fast political suicide, I guess, you would want slow political suicide, assuming that they actually get no impacts from that. So on that basis, I'm so proud to propose a few things in this speech, just team by team. I want to start with OG, next moving on to OO, last but not least CO. First of all, on OG, their entire case is basically you can seize the opportunity, right? You can take control, and the Conservatives are able to buy into. Just two main questions that they've never fulfilled the burden of, and I'm not persuaded by because of their own case tension. A, they never proved to us why Conservatives will actually win. This is something that is quite literally uncertain, and this is because their own argumentation. Note, the Conservative Party is a minority, as they argue on themselves, which is why they can take advantage of this, right? So then why is it actually true that they can win? So they have to first get a majority over the Liberals in order for a coalition government to be formed in the first place. It's never been proven to us that they can actually do that in the first place. It is the same mechanism they tell us. A, Conservatives don't have history. B, people only vote Conservatives to get rid of Trudeau instead of, perpetually Trudeau is gone right now. But also 3, it's all the mechanisms that OG gives us about regional stuff, etc., etc. The implication of what I just told you under A is that Conservatives winning is not something that is certain at all because of the decrease in Liberal support of after claiming, but also just every single mechanism that they told us. Now B, this is the second thing that is very uncertain in their case that also they concede to, which is that Conservatives becoming a new coalition party is quite uncertain. Think about every single mechanism that CO has given to you in this debate. But also, there's other reasons, for example, number 1, narratives and propaganda will not be with the NDP. So usually coalition governments, you have some type of connection from the past. You have nothing like that from the past. Number 2, you have extremely different perspectives on not just, healthcare, corporate taxes, gases, etc., etc. Because you guys are seen as just different people, even if you don't have different policies. At the end of the day, one is supposed to be really the white right, and the other is supposed to be somebody who is very new, bringing new perspectives to the table. These people are never ever associated together. But also see, the NDP isn't that good of a comparative. That is to say, the NDP, if a coalition government were ever to be formed, the first choice I would think about would not be the NDP with the Conservatives. Instead, it would presumably be the Liberals. Yes, they've been the most, the biggest contesters, but for the same reason, that means they have the most people backing them up. So therefore, if the Conservatives wanted more support and another re-election, etc., instead of considering the NDPs as their, most direct next partner, they're not, they consider the Liberals. How are we much more certain than OG then? There's 2 things I want to talk about. First of all, we think that the mechanism that they need is 2 things, right? I just told you. Number 1, they have to make sure that the Conservatives can actually win. But number 2, they have to make sure that the Conservatives actually want to form a coalition government with the NDP. We don't need that. We told you that the voting action in and of itself is enough to show that you're distancing from people, that you're actually able to show that this is already a significant action enough to market. This is something that you're able to use to show that you're a new generation, that you actually, you're actually able to get more votes from that. I want to take you right now. Why are more votes important? Which is the second thing that I want to talk about. Because I feel OG just leaves it up to more votes. So more votes is like presumably good. Why is it true that we need more votes? And this is critical analysis that's actually going to help them actually beat opposition bench, which is that if you don't get votes, you're not going to be able to get people inside the MP, which means that this is the prerequisite to any sort of coalition government or any sort of winning happening in the first place. So that is to say, we win them on two metrics. Number one, uncertainty, but also second of all, is the prerequisite to getting anything on opposition bench. Now, next I want to talk about OO. OO's argumentation really boils down to one single thing. They say political suicide is just bad. This means that, because even in their second speech, they just associate every single argument with that. So for example, they say NDP cannot gain political leverage. It all boils down because political suicide. And the mechanism under this is that because you're politically associated with them before. There's just three things I want to talk about. Number one, it has never been proven to us why changing now is not something that is good. Yes, you have been associated from the past, but you've always been a different party. So I don't really understand why it is not strategic to do it right now. But number two, let's say you do political suicide. They've never proven to me why this is something that's bad. So what happens after political suicide, right? Like maybe you do something that people like see as, oh wow, you're doing something absolutely new. But why is doing something new absolutely bad? But number three, here is what is symmetric on both sides of the house. What is symmetric is that political suicide is happening on both sides. But what is going to be certain in terms of likelihood is that it's only on our side of the house where you can get the better suicide, which is that you're actually able to, you have certain harms. You're just going to lose votes continue on their side of the house. It's only certain on our side of the house where you're actually going to be able to have some form of change. You're actually be able to actually, like there's at least a chance for some form of change because they've never provided us with a comparative. I think that we definitely win them just on the certainty of benefits. Last but not least, CO. The same issue with them. Their entire case is responsive towards OG, which we kind of do support, but I need them to give me a comparative about how slow political suicide is strategic. You have no say right now, you have no say in the future inside the Liberals, and we would just rather that you have a say when you do this voting against the non-confederation. On that basis, proud to propose. Thank you.